Welcome to the Mom as Well podcast, where we are digging deep into the gifts and the gaps of foster and adoptive parenting. I'm Tara Hutton, and I'm glad you're here. Mama's Well. Yes, she is. Well, if this is your first time to the podcast, to the Mom as Well podcast, and you are a foster or adoptive parent, or really parent to anyone, maybe even just human, you're in the right place. We're here to talk about things that matter. We're here to talk about ways that we can better care and nurture for ourselves so that we can go out into the world, into our homes, and better care for our kids. Parenting has been the thing that has taught me the most. It has been the most challenging thing that I have ever done. And honestly, I started this podcast because I wanted a little support. I wanted to learn from people who have done things that I haven't done. I wanted to be around people who are like-minded, and it's such a gift. It's awesome, the people I get to meet. And today, I'm really excited about this. I've been talking about it with my husband for a week, and it was cool how I got to meet her. And I don't want to keep talking. I'm not going to ramble on, but today my guest is the Chief Prosecutor for Special Victims Unit or Division for Montgomery County District Attorney's Office. So she does work each day that I'm sure is incredibly challenging and maybe even painful, but she is also, this is the part I love, she is also a wife and a mother to 4, I believe, and one of them was adopted and one of them is currently in foster care. So that makes this even more remarkable that she is doing this thing that we do, and also in the career that she's in, it's so relevant. So without going on anymore, I'm excited to introduce Shanna Redwine.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm excited. I can't wait. You're in such a different world than me.
Well, there's never a dull moment.
Yeah, I know. I can't even imagine. Yeah. And that's what were you the girl that just always knew you wanted to be an attorney?
I had it in my mind, but, for a while there in college, I was the girl who didn't know what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And switched majors a few times, but pretty quickly settled on law and went to law school. And from the time I was there, I knew I wanted to be a prosecutor. I knew I wanted to be in a position that, where I could grow and eventually be in a space to help children and victims and kind of vulnerable population. I didn't really know where I would land in that. Frankly, I didn't know if I'd be a good speaker or a good attorney. But I knew what I wanted to do generally, and I was fortunate to end up as a prosecutor and at the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office specifically, where we just really, I work for our elected District Attorney, Brett Ligon, who has a heart for kids, mm-hmm. and who is just tireless in his pursuit of protecting kids. And so mm-hmm. I started there and worked my way up and was ultimately put in a position where I handle a division that is exclusively working with victims and with vulnerable populations, child abuse cases, domestic violence, child fatalities, internet crimes against children, and human trafficking.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So because my experience is like Criminal Minds, Law and Order. So tell me what a typical day for you looks like. I know when we first emailed back and forth, you said next week I'm working on a big child abuse case. Mm-hmm. Like what is a typical day for you?
Yeah. So I supervise a group of attorneys and investigators and victim coordinators and administrative personnel who, again, we work in 3 different sections. One of the groups that I supervise is specifically assigned to Children's Safe Harbor, and that's my team that does child physical abuse, child fatality, and child sexual abuse prosecution. Children's Safe Harbor is our local children's advocacy center, and all of our detectives and our prosecutors and investigators, social workers with Children's Protective Services, forensic interviewers, counselors, they're housed together to work those types of cases. I also supervise the Internet Crimes Against Children and Human Trafficking section, attorneys and investigators that work there. And there we investigate and prosecute offenders who victimize children online, and do a lot of undercover work in that capacity. My detectives do. And then our domestic violence section, which works on the high lethality, high danger domestic violence situations that often we find, and increasingly more so in the pandemic, children are part of those, or they witness those. They're often victimized by those as well.
Okay,
and so,
what does that go? Tell me in layman's term what you just said.
Yeah, so I'm a supervisor is kind of my primary duties. I'm also a trial attorney, and so I think when we first talked, I was going into a child physical abuse jury trial. And so what that means is that, when a person commits a crime against a child, law enforcement investigates that, and they file those charges with our office. And then it is myself and the prosecutors that work with me, it's our job to pursue those charges, to seek justice in those cases in the courtroom, and ultimately ending up in jury trials if we don't come to a resolution. And so our office handles adult offenders, so adult defendants, and we're broken down in divisions, and my division handles child abuse offenses and family violence. So, anybody who harms a member of their family or household, or an intimate partner, that's kind of what we specialize in my division.
Yeah, so you're going after, your kids are, the kids that you're dealing with in the courtroom are all in some sort of temporary care, right? Or
well, oftentimes, the way our county has it split up, right, is we handle the prosecution. And so we have a defendant who, say, is charged with injury to a child. Say it's a physical abuse case, they've physically harmed a child. We handle the prosecution of the criminal charges, right? We charge them with a felony offense. We can make plea offers, and we negotiate that. And if they do not accept a plea agreement, we go to a jury trial. By agreement in Montgomery County, I work for the district attorney's office. The county attorney's office handles CPS prosecution and juvenile defendants. And so what we see a lot at the district attorney's office is we'll have kiddos who are victims of a crime. Now, sometimes that crime is committed, say, by somebody outside the household, and those kiddos are home with their parents, and there's not an active CPS case. As you can imagine, on a lot of our cases, there are active CPS cases. Those kiddos can be in care and foster care, or with a family member, a kinship placement. And what's interesting about kind of how the justice system works in these cases is we have a criminal prosecution, and that is, moving along down the tracks, and we're seeking justice on the criminal side of it. Oftentimes, that results in, again, plea offers, plea agreements, and or jury trials. At the same time, the CPS courts are handling the placement of that child. And so it's two very interrelated court systems with the same kiddo. And that's what I think people don't think about a lot, is like sometimes these kiddos who are victims of crimes, they're going through the process that I handle, right, which is the criminal side. The person who hurt them has been charged with a crime, and we're moving on that case. But parallel to that, they might also be in a court system with a different attorney, with a different judge, with a different legal standard, and that court is determining their placement and their permanency. And so, I think as adults, right, we sit back and we think of like the court system and how it works and how complicated it is. And a lot of times our kiddos who are victims of crime, they're going through it twice, right?
Yeah.
They've got whoever hurt them being prosecuted criminally, but then they also have another set of stakeholders who are deciding, where am I going to be for the rest of my life? What are the service plans for, my caregivers? And so they're sometimes involved in two court systems, as overwhelming as that can be. And so, a lot of what we've been looking at recently is just really how do we treat kids well as they're going through that. One, court case is complicated enough, and we see our kiddos in two a lot. And so two independent systems, but they run parallel. But a criminal case may be pending. For my cases, they're all generally in district court because they're felonies. So there'll be a judge sitting on those. And then there's another judge and another court and another set of attorneys that are handling the CPS matter. And we work really hard to communicate and to make sure there's not information lost between those two court systems, because what we see a lot is sometimes these agencies can just really silo off, and these courts can silo off, not by any bad intent, right? It's just a matter of everybody kind of doing their job and looking in front of them. And so we worked really hard here in our county at facilitating communication to make sure there's not information loss, to make sure that, you know, we talk about kind of safety nets, right? We're putting as many safety nets under these kiddos as we can, because they're going through a lot.
Yeah.
They're going through a lot.
Shanna, when, you know, because this is, you know, what you do every day, but when do you remember a time where it was like, it like hit you, what you're dealing with, you know, or was this a sudden thing? In other words, like, I'm very naive when it comes to this kind of stuff. You know, I haven't had a ton of exposure to just the horrific things. Do you remember a time where it just like hit you, and you may have had many of these moments, but it's just like, oh my gosh, what in the world?
You know, I think the time that I can remember that stands out is the first time I had to see child abuse happen. I always, you know, tried to pride myself on, you know, just like putting my head down, and I've always found it a lot easier to deal with really bad things after the fact, right? Like I can't change what happened to this kiddo. I can try to prevent it from happening in the future. I can try to get some, you know, measure of justice, but they're not being hurt right now. And there's a lot of peace in that. I remember the first time it hit me, the weight of it was the first time we had an incident of child abuse that was on video. And frankly, seeing it is just different. It's all hard, but that was something that was hard. And eventually I was able to lead our Internet Crimes Against Children division, and you see it a lot, and it's part of it, you know, dealing with child exploitation material and images, and that is something that's you really can't prepare for. And so I remember the first time I had to see it happen, the weight of that really is the first time I think I appreciated it. Maybe the way I should. Yeah,
it's like you can't, you know, when I talk to our children about pornography and things like that, like you can't unsee something. No. And so once you see it, you can't. How has that impacted your role as a mom?
Yeah. You know, you work hard to not, you know, to parent your children in a way that, you know, I don't want my children exposed to the things that I have to deal with at work from the world or from me, you know, but that said, I mean, there's an awareness, and our kiddos are more exposed than ever. And I'll tell you, that's something that I've been a prosecutor for, you know, over a decade, but it was until I moved and started handling internet crimes against children that you really appreciate the level of exposure that they see. I read somewhere recently that, you know, I think the first time that the average age of children being exposed to pornography generally is around 11. And man, that's something that was foreign, you know, to me growing up. It's something that we didn't experience.
You're
that
younger
exposure.
than me, but we did not have cell phones. I was married before we had a cell phone.
And it's a danger, and it's a danger that, you know, as parents, right, we're not going to let somebody walk in our front door and groom our child or harm our child. But offenders now have that ability to walk in your front door through your child's device. And so, you know, I just try to warn parents of that, you know, that's yours, and you allow your child access to it. And since it's yours and you're allowing them access to it, ultimately it's our responsibility to make sure that we keep our kids as safe as we can. And the world's different than when we were kids. And just their level of exposure is higher, and that increases their risk of victimization, because it is just another way to access a child, for a bad guy to access a child that just frankly we don't always appreciate as adults. I don't always appreciate it as somebody who handles internet crimes against children. And our kids are smart, and they're a step ahead of us on these devices. And, you know, just always trying to limit that exposure generally and limit that risk for them, because it's kind of a new frontier.
It's definitely. I mean, when I have an issue with my iPad, I ask my son, help me, you know. And so in my daughters, you know, I have a passcode on here that when they figure it out, I have to, you know, I'm always changing it. Like, why won't you let us know? Because I have to protect you. What do you mean?
They just have never lived in a world where it wasn't there. You know, they have a level of comfort with it. We use, you know, like every time something new comes out, I remember when we didn't have it, and they just don't.
So, like, you're in this, you're seeing, you know, horrific things, reading horrific things. How has that, or did that influence you and your husband's decision to become foster parents?
It did. You know, I've always had in my mind, you know, the need and the opportunity to serve in the area of foster care and child welfare. It's kind of been in the back of my mind, but certainly once I started working in these cases, and less about directly like my direct work, but as I started, you know, having the opportunity to work with, you know, with case investigators and caseworkers and learning about, I remember the first time I learned about, you know, the term child without placement, right? That there are children sleeping in CPS offices because there's nowhere for them to go, and just feeling like the weight of that and the injustice of that. And so we thought about it and we started talking about it. We had our 2 oldest kiddos, and, you know, they were they weren't babies anymore.
Yeah.
And so I remember we went to our first informational meeting at the CPS office, and kind of let that sink in and absorb. And, you know, I'm a person of faith, and I don't know the answers to everything, but I know that, you know, in the fall of 2018, I just personally felt a sense of urgency. Like I should have started the licensing process yesterday, and we rushed through it. And that spring, our son came home, and so for us, it was very much, you know, it was where we were meant to be, and we felt fortunate that, you know, the things fell into place that put us there. We had some friends who fostered and really encouraged us and took us to dinner and poured into us and taught us, you know, things that we wouldn't have known otherwise, and answered our questions just very graciously when they were in the thick of it. And so my work, but also the people, you know, in our community that just really gave us the time to answer those questions and to give us that encouragement that we would have community and we could do this. We were equipped for this. And so work, but then also just the people side of it.
Yeah. How has being a foster parent impacted you in the courtroom?
Yeah. It has really changed the way I think about everything, I think, in the world. You know, I first learned, we talked a little bit about TBRI and, you know, trauma informed care. I first learned that in a foster care class. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, first of all, this is going to help me with my biological children. This is fantastic information. I wish I knew it before. I remember the second thing I thought was, man, I work with a lot of really conscientious, caring, hardworking prosecutors who I bet have never heard these terms before either. And we can apply these to our kiddos who are going through the court system. And since then, we have engaged in training our prosecutors on what does trauma look like in kids. And you know, we see a lot of times kiddos whose trauma behaviors are used against them, right? And I don't mean that to disparage, but it's just a fact of it, right? Well, you can't believe this kiddo because name list of behaviors, you know, or, well, maybe you need to look at this case again or reduce this case because kiddo did X, Y, or Z, or, you know, look at their school records. They've been in trouble. And man, once you look at that through a trauma lens and realize that that is perfectly consistent with what they've been through, it is the most, getting involved in foster care from the training side of it, is the most impactful thing and learning opportunity I've ever had as a prosecutor. And then personally, you know, our experience as foster parents has taught me more about, you know, just grace and, you know, empathy and compassion and just looking at the world a little bit differently than any other experience in my life. You know, it just really changed us completely for the better.
I loved what you said, and I recently watched All Rise. Have you seen it?
I know of it, and I've met the judge, and we talked a little bit about foster care. I've not seen the whole thing. I went to the screening, and then I got pulled away for work. But
you can watch it online.
Yes.
After I've seen it now, I know I'm probably going to mention it every podcast, but you'll love it.
Yeah.
But it's what you said how you see, you know, the kids they have these behaviors, they're stealing, they're this. It's not that you want to and this is where it differs from how I was raised, you know, but it's not, you're not saying let's let these kids off the hook because of their trauma. No. You're saying let's give them what they need.
Yeah. Right.
Like they're stealing. Why?
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
mom doesn't give them any food. They're
Right.
hungry
Yeah.
or whatever.
Let's actually focus on the issue.
Yeah. And
try to
so
fix that.
I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, so you're seeing the kid through trauma lens, change. It does. It
Yeah.
changes everything.
It does. It does.
So powerful.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, you're looking at that whole person, and I remember again just thinking like, man, this is so important. This is so important for people to know. As a prosecutor talking to juries who are charged with making the right decision, with getting it right in really serious cases. As a mom, when I'm interacting with my children, and just as a person, right? Like just when I'm thinking through how people parent and how children act and what children need, it's just like a shift that it's like, you look at those pictures like, is it a horse or is it a pond? And you can only see the horse, but then once you see, the frog or the pond, that you don't ever know how you saw the horse,
Yeah.
And so it's
That's a good example.
yeah, it's just something that once you see it and once you learn it, but yeah, it made me better at my work. It made me a better parent to all my kids, those who've experienced hardship and those who really haven't. And I can't say enough about it,
And you recently just spent an entire week
I did.
getting a TBRI Practitioner license,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, I went through the TBRI Practitioner course. It's through TCU, through the Karen Purvis Institute, and it was an extensive program and just incredible. I would encourage anybody that can look into that and take that opportunity to do it. I felt like I knew a lot, and then I went through that and realized I just kind of scratched the tip of the surface.
Yeah.
But it was really good. Myself and one of my chief prosecutor that's assigned to Children's Safe Harbor both went through it, and it's just I can't say enough.
I feel so lucky to live in this county.
Oh,
think that's so
I do too.
wonderful.
I mean,
So what was your greatest
Yeah.
takeaway from the week?
man, what's funny is there were so many, but the one that we immediately started working through, my chief at Safe Harbor and I, of all the things we learned about kids, one thing that we said, we were like, what about our people, right? Our prosecutors who are having to observe child exploitation material, our prosecutors who are meeting with kiddos who have suffered abuse every day, our victim coordinators who are really on the front lines of that, right? They're taking those calls every day as our victims process trauma. And something that I hadn't thought about was, are we doing best by kiddos that we serve if we are not okay, and if we're not making sure our people are okay? And so just trying to set up systems within our office to, and that's our next big step. And again, our office is very engaged in this, but just really being intentional about all of our folks who are experiencing that secondary trauma, and making sure that they are regulated before they are bringing victimized children in and walking them through the criminal justice process, and really how we could do better in that side of it, right? Because if we're doing better by our folks, then they are doing better by the kids that they serve, and how we can do better at that. And that was something that, just an immediate action item that she and I both talked about the day we finished. We finished at noon on a Friday, and she came down to my office, and we just kind of sat there and talked about that aspect of it. Are we really doing best by the kids that we serve if we are not regulated, if we are not at our best, if we are not able to be fully present for them and observing their needs and meeting their needs as we walk them through, again, this really difficult process that is run by adults and made by adults, and that they're that is outside of their control. That was kind of the first action item that we took away.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's I haven't talked to you much about, but that was the catalyst for Mama's well.
Yeah.
The well is here,
Right.
and recognizing my own developmental trauma, my own is this learning to deal with it. I've had to learn things like how to regulate myself because I didn't know, and when we can't care for ourselves, we can't give what we don't have.
Yep.
And so that was super, I think that's been probably my biggest takeaway too, is that's awesome.
Yeah. It's funny, one of my attorneys called me, an attorney that works with me, and she's one of the hardest working, child abuse prosecutor. And she said something, and she said, my kind of philosophy is like, moms can't take sick days, right?
Yeah.
You're not allowed to take a sick day. And I thought, man, like that's why you're so good, you're so driven and so good. But but I want you to be able to take a sick day, you know, and
Yeah.
that doesn't mean just because you have the flu, but just really filling yourself up. And that's hard. I mean, and I told you before we, you know, started, like, I'm the worst at that, you know, I mean, I'm a mom and you just get by.
Yeah.
But it is ultimately best for our kids when we are well. And that's, you know, that is maybe the most important thing for them.
I think so.
And probably the hardest things for moms.
Yeah,
to
I think so too. I think so too. You know, when I think about the thing that really hit home for me when I was pondering talking with you, I think early yesterday morning, and I was thinking about how this, you know, well, let me, because it was really profound. So I want to make sure I say it right. For me, it was profound. It may not be profound for anybody, but, how many, and this is kind of the quandary I bet you find do you know the statistics of how many of the people that you prosecute came from the foster care system?
Man, I don't know those statistics, but
you could probably say big, medium, or small.
I would not be surprised if it was big. You know, directly from the foster care system, I don't know, but I would venture a bet that a lot of them experience trauma.
Yeah.
You know, that their needs have gone unmet, and that, you know, that there's something there that, and you know, there's kind of two different kinds of offenders, right? And I mean, obviously we see the worst, and some people are just evil.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are some people who are just horrible and they do horrible things to kids. There are some people who have suffered serious trauma.
Yeah.
And they work their way through the court system. And it's our job as prosecutors. You know, again, my unit's very specialized, but we handle all kinds of cases in our office, misdemeanors up to felonies. And it's our job to sort that out, right?
Yeah.
Who are those that we can help? Who are those that have experienced trauma, that have not had a single break handed to them their whole life, and they made a decision and it wasn't a good one, but we can try something different, right? We can start over. We can give them another chance. We can give them a diversion. We can put them into a drug court or a mental health court, which we're fortunate to have in this county. We have judges and prosecutors who invest in that. And that's something that you have to sort out, right? Part of our job, our job is to seek justice, and we have to figure out who is who, right? Because there are some people that the right thing for them and for what they did is just to say, you don't need to be free again.
Yeah.
You need to go to prison for as long as you can, because that's the only way this community is safe.
Yeah.
But man, there's a lot of people who the right answer is you need help, and we're the first person who've ever offered it to you.
Wow.
And on a lot of our, you know, offenses, especially our nonviolent offenses and drug offenses and things like that, you see that, you know, that group of folks that have just really experienced trauma. Their ACEs score is probably very high.
Very high. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and you know, developing eyes to figure that out, and having a listening ear to their attorney and to law enforcement that investigates it. You know, that's the mark of somebody who does this job well. And across the board in our office. And, you know, we even, you know, here and again, we come across cases that within our division that are different than just like your true evil, you know, you need to never walk out of prison again. And we have to figure that out, right? Is this a situation where, you know, we need to work with CPS to facilitate, you know, helping this person learn how to be a parent, right? It's a nonviolent offense. But it's a situation that puts a child at harm. Maybe it's not even something that we need to charge, but it's a parent that needs some resources. And we're lucky that we have the collaborative partnerships with, you know, our local child protective services, our Children's Advocacy Center, Safe Harbor, CASA Child Advocates. That's why that communication is so important, because once we figure out who we're talking about and the situation, that's when we figure out if we have the tools to help, you know, and to right that.
And how powerful and I believe, because you spent last week in TBRI Practitioner training, that the goal would be everyone, law enforcement, CASA, caseworker, everyone, all of our resources, all of our group homes and our what are they called? Our
residential treatment
treatments. All of those places become trauma. They start to see through the trauma lens.
Sure.
Because they're not.
Yeah.
Right.
Our
medical, our healthcare. Right. Everybody.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be so
It
powerful?
would. I mean, I think a lot of times we are treating the symptoms and not the cause.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what learning about this really does. It helps you see the cause more than the symptoms. And again, in my line of work, that allows me so much more to help a child who is in crisis when I'm not just looking at the symptoms or the behaviors. You know, I'm looking at what's happened to lead them here.
What's underneath those behaviors. So when you are working with, and I know you're not on the CPS side of that,
Right.
and so sometimes you're not even working with the parents or whatever, but how do you see, like, if you could just create the biggest vision board of, like, that would put you out of a job, right? It would put you completely out of a job.
Right.
What would you see that could really, like, get to the root?
Yeah. So I think, you know, the first thing is, you know, again, probably early detection, right? Recognizing if every agency, and we don't have a crystal ball, right? But being able to recognize warning signs would help lower a lot of those instances of non-willful injury, right? And being able to recognize those early warning signs and wrap resources around vulnerable families would help. It would help keep kids safe. Really pouring into, you know, those family units that are struggling. And, you know, it's a hard balance, right? Like again, there's a lot of times where every agency that can pour into folks, you know, pour into them, and that child's still at risk, and we have to deal with that. But what I've tried to learn, and I'm always growing at it, right, is that compassion and empathy can live in the same sentence and in the same, like, goal line as child safety. I would never support anything that reduced child safety, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to have compassion and empathy at the same time. But to answer your specific question, I think early detection of warning signs, resources for those struggling families, identifying at-risk offenders who are just, right, identifying them just those evil people early, right? There are some people who desire to harm children. There are people who desire to cause pain to children or to exploit children, and making sure that we can identify those folks and just remove them from the equation, right? And that might leave you with some caregivers that have struggles and that have traumas and that are broken, but they're not actively seeking to harm a child, and maybe then we can help them, right? And we can put those resources that we have into those that want to protect kids and want to keep them safe. And so it's a hard balance, right? Like part of inherent in child abuse and in family violence generally is kind of an isolation, right? It is a crime that happens behind closed doors. It's a crime that happens within the family, you know, unit. Oftentimes, the vast majority of our offenders are either family members or related to the children that they victimize. And so finding a way to reduce that isolation, having, you know, good, safe adults to be trained and to know when a child is at risk, and to feel the agency to say something and to know who they can reach out to. So early detection awareness just from the community, and just being able to really understand those that seek to harm children and those that don't, right? The willful versus the more non-willful types of situations that occur.
Yeah. You know, I'm sitting here thinking of, like, how I know it's so important to have our court systems see through the trauma lens, but, you know, a lot of times it's our schools, our teachers, you know, how important is it for our teachers? As I sat here with a guest recently, and not even just one time, but, you know, years and years of abuse had gone by, neglect, before anyone even asked. You know, nobody even asked. Nobody even wondered, because on the outside, another trauma behavior is perfection, right? You're holding it all together, and you're, you know, your grades are good, and your work is good, and you smile and you laugh, and you're inside dying. And, you know, isn't it all just come down to relationship?
Yep. That is exactly the right word. I mean, it's everything comes down to that, right? as big agencies working together, as in our church communities and our local communities, in our schools. I think it's all about relationship. Because that's the only time that people feel safe to ask for help. And I agree with you. Our probably our largest number of reporters are teachers and coaches and counselors. What we see, for example, during the summers, child abuse reports tend to drop off a little bit because there's less safe adults looking. During the pandemic, what we saw was child abuse reports went down for a while, even though we know it wasn't happening less, right? Because isolation and financial stress and health worries and all that just increases those occurrences. But our child abuse reports went down some. When kids became less isolated, they went right back up. At the same time, our domestic violence filings went up significantly, and we saw more cases where children were witnessing that because they're home, and has stayed up with that isolation and financial stress. And so, when the family unit is struggling, there has to be somebody in relationship outside of them, and sometimes it's teachers, but sometimes it's extended family and friends, right? Because you might not know if your person is showing trauma by perfection. It's going to take an aunt or an uncle or a neighbor to notice those more subtle signs.
Will you tell us? I think that would be really important to know because I don't think anyone's ever taught me. I wouldn't necessarily know. Now, if I had a conversation, like I said, in relationship, but what are some of the signs? Tell us some of that. What would we recognize?
You mean signs that a child is being harmed?
Yeah,
or abused?
just what are some of those red flags that I might not be aware of?
Yeah, and they can range across the board. What we taught teachers during the pandemic, right, is if you can't have meaningful access to a child, and this was during remote school, right, or meaningful conversations with a child, or if they're withdrawn, that is a concern. If a child's behavior changes, right, a kiddo who's normally, very extroverted and rambunctious suddenly becomes very quiet, or somebody who's very quiet suddenly starts acting out, fighting, some of those things that would typically be seen as disciplinary. So those major changes in behaviors would be something that would concern me. There's some more explicit ones, right? Injury or weight changes, or any kind of acting out sexually. But some of it is more subtle. Some of it is that kiddo who's normally making all A's, and all of a sudden they're failing their classes, or they love school, and all of a sudden they don't care about school anymore. And that could be family abuse. That could be relational trauma that they're experiencing, right? School is hard for kids nowadays, and they're dealing with social media. They're dealing with their relationships and their bodies, oftentimes being very much more exposed than they normally are. And so, we're watching for child abuse, but there's also kids who are struggling emotionally, and kids who are, struggling with depression or anxiety, that similar symptoms, right? I don't know that you can always diagnose and say because that kid's
Child
behavior
abuse, right.
change, it's child abuse. Could be relational trauma that's happening. Either way, that kid needs to be loved on and poured into. But it's funny that you said relationship, because I think as systems, right? Systems in the government, but also, again, in our local communities, in our churches, in our families, in our friend groups, that relationship and communication are the two single most important factors to keeping kids safe. Those of us, like safe adults who are charged with keeping kids safe, and that's everybody, right? That's not somebody who has a title as a prosecutor or a caseworker. Those of us who consider ourselves safe adults, who are capable and willing and able to look out for the well-being of kids, we have to be communicating and in relationship with those kids and with others, because abuse thrives on isolation. Abuse thrives on silence. Abuse thrives on manipulation, and those things are harder when we're communicating and we're in relationship. So those would probably be the two biggest things that I would say across the board. You can apply those in any circumstance, and they help.
That's good. That's good stuff. Okay. Well, what I like that the thing that I was thinking was so profound is just, it wasn't profound. It was just that quandary of that you find yourself in, because now that you have a trauma lens, you start to recognize the cycle, right? This kid, they abused because most likely they were abused, right? Or they, whatever, right? And I just think that to live in that tension is basically what you do, and you're right. I mean, it's just like parenting our kids. I mean, there's boundaries. you love and you nurture and you support
Yep.
and you see
Yep.
the whys, but there's still a firm
Yep.
boundary,
Yeah.
you know, and you can't hurt people.
Yeah. And I think that's a part of loving people well, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that in my job and as a foster parent and an adoptive parent, right? Like, by not setting boundaries and not being truthful with what is right and wrong and good and
Yeah.
bad is not loving somebody well. Which is where I've really had to learn that you can live in a space of like accountability and compassion. Those things are not mutually
They're not either or.
exclusive.
They're and both.
They're and both, and that is how you love people well. And man, talk about living in the tension of that. As foster parents and as adoptive parents, you always live in that tension, and I don't know that you ever get comfortable in that tension because it feels inherently at odds. But if we're really thinking about it, right, speaking truth to those that we love and our kids families, and loving them well and having empathy and compassion for them, that is how you love people well. But it is a constant tension. Probably more so for me in my job. I learn more, compassion and empathy through foster care than I ever have, because it is so personal and it's so, there's so much at stake and your heart is involved. But I just think what I've come to learn is those two things they have to live in the same space. If we're really looking at everything and really keeping kids safe and loving on families as a unit, and protecting the kiddos who are in care.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. As foster mama, we've talked a lot about the courtroom. What have been some of your greatest challenges, and how old are your children?
Yeah, so my kids are 7, 4, 2, and 1.
Okay.
So our house is always messy and very loud.
Yeah.
And just the biggest challenges in the courtroom.
What about home? What about
Yeah.
home? What about you were biological mom to 2.
Sure.
Now all of a sudden you've moved into this world of parenting someone else's child, right? And what's been some of your greatest challenge there?
I'll say, my 2 oldest boys they're like a textbook in love and compassion and care.
Yeah.
I learn from them every day, but the lack of control is always hard for me. The unknown, I'm a very type A and I'm a planner, and I'm, living in the unknown as long as you do, is hard. And kind of being a little bit of a spectator in something that's happening with people that you care very much about and love and adore and are family, that's hard. I've had to work hard to let go of that control, because I think if you're going to do this for a long time, you have to. Yeah. Otherwise, you just won't be able to.
I love what you just said. Being a spectator.
Yeah.
Being a spectator in the critical plays here of someone you love is very hard. That is good, because you are used to being in there in that courtroom and making it happen, right?
Right.
And in this courtroom, we really, there's not a lot.
You don't. And we have been blessed with really, really incredible people who have surrounded our kids. I know that's not everybody's experience, and I know that, not everybody's the same. Sometimes I just feel, I can't believe how blessed we've been and our kids are, and I'm so thankful for that. But
you're talking about with caseworkers,
with our
and
workers,
judges,
and
all that,
and CASAs, and our caseworkers, and our judges, and the attorneys that are involved in the cases, and just people who really care, are trauma informed, and they care about the well-being of kids. And but I think that finding places where you can righteously advocate for kids and families and create relationship even in those really hard situations. I've never, we've been fostering for about 2.5 years, and I've never been disappointed when in the relationships that we've advocated for and tried to reach out. It's always blessed us and our kids. That doesn't mean it comes easy, but just finding the places where you're not exerting control so much as you're trying to make the best of a situation that is kind of inherently broken.
Yeah. Like, for example, what do you
I think just, again, sitting in that space of truth and compassion with families and
like birth families
and with the court system, right? Like it's easy to be like, well, why is this happening? And why did this paperwork not get filed? And, then thinking back to the fact these are all human beings too, who have lives and, ultimately none of this is in our control, but we can try to just do the next right thing in the situation that we're in, and be good to the people who are in this space. I mean, nobody's in child welfare work for the money. Nobody's, even the folks who are in the courtroom, it's not like anybody's getting rich off of it.
Yeah.
And so understanding that, these are people who, I think if you can approach everybody, this person with a good heart, who's trying,
well, their caseload,
birth families included, right?
I mean, their caseloads,
right.
Sometimes I think one I talked to had like 26.
Oh, it's horrible. Yeah. And I think birth, again, there are circumstances where people are just intent on doing bad things to kids, but the majority of people, I still think this, even, as long as I've done the work I've done, the majority of people aren't trying to do bad.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that, that they're safe, that their behavior, that we should sign off on it. But man, I think if you can try to, at least when you meet people, give them the benefit that you would want, right? Like this is a person who's trying, this is a person who, based on their life experience or their caseload or whatever it is, if they're failing, most people aren't intent on doing bad.
Right. I think even back to those evil people, they were a baby too.
At some point.
At some point. But at some point, I mean, maybe only God can reform. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I see it. But the earlier we can intervene, and that's exactly what I think you're doing. And it's so powerful. I'm so excited. Every time I hear about people, and I need to put this in the show notes. I'm going to make a note to myself, all rise, I think for the sake of the children or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's about this judge in Tyler, and I think she's retired now, but she made, her courtroom was completely trauma informed. And it was so powerful.
Yeah.
And just to have, I mean, my vision board has this whole community that's just, and I don't really have a vision board. Yeah. But I'm just thinking about it, thinking about you and thinking about how you see things now and how, I love it. Yeah. I love it. And that's all we can do is start from where we have.
Right. Yeah.
This is what we have. This person's willing to do the work.
Yep.
I see you. You know what I mean? This person's willing to do the work. I see you.
Sure.
And just moving like that. It's so, so beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I think I know I struggle with, and I'm sure people struggle with, like I'm one person, and I mean, I'm in a position that I do have the ability to impact some things and affect some change, but I'm still one person. Like, I can't change bad laws. I can't change all the bad people in the world. I can't change, the national systems or broken systems, but like I have a circle of influence and I have a circle of, of relationship, and like once mine meets yours and yours meets somebody else's, that's how like the broader change happens. It happens over time. If it's done right, you can't snap your finger. But like my circle of influence and relationship can meet yours and can meet others who, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a really broad change.
I like it.
Because it's hard, right? If you think like I can't fix everything, it's easy to just stop and, and kind of shut down. But you can fix that. You can do your best to fix that situation you're in, or help that one child that you're dealing with, or help that one family, or, sign up for a foster care information class, or, sign up to be a waiting adoptive home for all the waiting children in the world, or, just do that, whatever you're called to do, take that first step.
Smile at the cashier at H-E-B.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Drop off a meal if somebody's not feeling,
Yeah, I love it. Just like, I think that's something I'm starting to understand about this world is like my energy affects yours. Yeah. And then you walk out of this room and that energy affects, and then when I'm not, like I had a really, I'm turning 50 this year, and like my hormones are rough. I told my husband last night and my son, I'm like, I just can't be any better than I am, so I'm going to bed. And so sometimes just know when you need to go to bed. You know what I'm saying? And so anyway, I think Shanna, you're doing a really good thing.
Thank you.
And I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
And I'm so grateful that you would choose to take an hour out of your incredibly, I mean, just being a mom to 4 and a foster mom is a lot.
It's much quieter in here, though.
Oh, yeah. You can stay as long as you want. We'll get some coffee.
Might need a nap.
But I really appreciate you doing this. And I really think that, I hope other counties, people in other counties are listening and every time I hear from somebody from our county, I'm proud that we, and I agree. We're taking some steps that are super, super life-changing. Life-changing. And thank you for watching out for my kids that live in this county. And keeping us safe, and you can make a difference in the courtroom. Yeah. I mean, I never wanted to be an attorney. Yeah. But I sure am glad there are attorneys, because you can make a difference. People listen when things like that happen, and you can change things. And so I'm happy about that, and I'm thankful that your 2 children you've been able to keep safe for a while, and
we
loved on them. Yeah, and they've changed your life. It's like
they're precious.
I would say foster parenting has forever impacted my husband and I, and our 3 boys.
Oh yeah,
our biological sons.
For the better, every day.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean it's not hard. There's another and both.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes. So. Yeah. There's nothing. There's been no greater blessing than being parents, and the fact that we, some of our kids came to be parents this way has changed our entire family for the better. Yeah. And I hope we never, we're out of this season of our lives at some point down the road, that we never go back to that place of not knowing and not, sometimes it's easy not to see things when you're not engaged.
Yeah. Oh, if you adopt those 2, you'll be engaged for a long time.
we hope we get to be.
Oh, you'll be adopted. You'll be engaged for a long time. My husband's a little bit older than me, and sometimes we sit on the back porch exhausted, yes. And we come on the back porch because it's quiet, and here they come. But then we're like, oh, and then we both look at each other and go, well, what else would we be doing at this stage in our life? Yeah. I mean, we think of some things, but right. But nothing more rewarding. No. So anyway, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. I hope that you were, I learned a lot today, and from somebody who does something so different than I do on a day-to-day basis. And I love that. I love to get to know what other people do and how people think. And I am so excited that that awareness, that trauma awareness, is starting to become something that people are talking about and are actually taking action and doing, and that excites me. And I want to see our schools moving into that place, and our law enforcement. So talk about it. Talk about it in your communities. Talk about it in your churches. Share the podcast. Share this with everybody that you know. And like and subscribe. Do all those things. So we'll see you next week. Mama's well. Yes, she is.